Welcome back to part 3 of the Jaguar. I'm using the 211 white new pastel to add a few more bright white hairs on the nose, make it a little bit brighter on the side where the light strikes. Now I'm using the 276 buff to continue adding hairs in between and around the spots on the Jaguar's head, making short little strokes around those black spots. And now I'm switching to the Conte number 47, and I'm pulling some of the hairs into the black spot, just a few. I switch back and forth between the pencil and the new pastel. The new pastel is a little bit brighter. So I do a few hairs and then I rotate the stick so that I'm getting a bright hair each time that bright and sharp that I use it. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit while I add all these little hairs. Now we're back in real time, and I'm using my pencil to stroke in some longer hairs. It's very nice for adding the longer hairs. And now we're going to go back to that sharp new pastel and reinforce those black spots and pull a few black hairs out into the background with that. It just really adds the finishing touch. Put a little black on the edge of the ear. We want to make sure that the ear remains separate from the body. Making it a little darker on the inside of that ear. Adding a few more hairs with the 276 buff. Putting a few touches of brighter hair on the edge of the ear. And these hairs on the side of the face are longer, so I'm making them longer with my new pastel. We've finished the Jaguar's head, so now we're going to shift our attention to this paw. So I'm using my 263 Indian Red to add in some darker brown color on the paw. And I'm just going right over the spots that we laid in with the charcoal pencil. And now I'm using a dark gray 259 new pastel to shade the bottom of the paw where the fur is white. Putting in the darker places that separates his toes. Also using the 259. Now I'm going to use my 229 new pastel black to darken the spots that are on his leg and paw. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit while I add all the spots to the leg and the paw of the leopard. Now that I've finished the spots, I'm going to put in some background before we finish the fur on his legs. So I'm using the Unison dark number 8, followed by number 12, green 14, and in Rembrandt 633.5 permanent yellow green. Those will be the colors I'm using. I'm just kind of blending them one into the other, and that's why I'm wearing gloves too, because your hands can get really covered with pastel. Now here I'm using a 700.5 black Rembrandt to darken this area down. Since this is going to be under the paw and go into the background and also is in the corner of the picture, we don't want the eye drawn out of the picture by a particularly light area. So I'm making it darker at the bottom than I did at the top of the painting. So I'm using my Unison up on its end to add color around the log that forms the platform that the Jaguar is laying on. So I'm putting all the green in and adding black, particularly where the shadow is underneath the the paw and both paws of the animal. I'm adding a little brown in now to kind of unify the colors. This is 409.3 burnt umber, adding that brown in. Now that I've got the green in that's around the paw, I can go back and start adding my fur to my Jaguar. I'm using the 211 white. Now I'm using the 276 buff. And I'll also be using the Conte pencil number 47, the same things that we used on the Jaguar's head. And I'm doing it in the same manner, going around each of the spots, pulling up little sharp hairs. I'm going to speed this part up just a little bit while you watch. And then we'll go on to the other steps in creating the Jaguar's leg and paw. And continuing to add hair with the 211 white on the outside edge of the paw. And then I'm going to switch to 276, and I'm also going to be using the Conte pencil. Now, when we worked on the head, the hairs went in an upward direction towards the top of the painting. Now we're going in a downward direction because that's the way the fur grows on the paw of the Jaguar. So be sure and follow the direction that the fur grows when you paint. I'm adding a little more 263 brown to the bottom edge of the arm. I decided it needs to be a little darker, so I'm using my Rembrandt 409.3 burnt umber to make that paw a little darker. Now I'm going to go back to adding hair with 276. After adding the hair on the top part of the leg, I'm now using my black NuPastel to darken the spots and pull in some little tiny black hairs back into the fur, just like we did on the top of the Jaguar's head. After reinforcing those black spots, I'm going back to adding more hair on the paw and arm. I pause every now and then to go and sharpen my pastel. That's why you see me switching, stopping, and going back again. It's because I've been sharpening my pastel. Because I cannot get these nice little hairs with a dull pastel. You have to keep it sharp all the time. As we work down the paw, I've switched to my 211 white, and I'll be using it to finish off the paw because the paw has, both paws have white fur instead of that creamy beige fur. So I want to use my white NuPastel to put the final hairs on top. We also used dark gray 259 NuPastel underneath as our underneath layer for the white fur. I've zoomed in on a paw so you can see me add those little tiny strokes, and I rotate my stick to get a sharp edge, and when it gets dull I go and sharpen it. I've speeded up the rest of the painting of the paw, adding the little white hairs. Now that we've added all the hair, it's time to finish the little black spots that are on the paw. So I'm doing that with my 229 New Pastel. After finishing the paw, I've decided that it's too prominent in the picture, so I need to push it back further into the background. So I'm going to do that by putting a light layer of Rembrandt 409.3 over the upper leg, and then I'm going to use the bottom end of my 259 New Pastel to push in the white paw area. Just kind of putting a little bit of color over it so it's not as prominent and doesn't draw the eye's attention. It was just a little too bright, and so sometimes we need to change things and we need to push that further back into the picture plane. Now we're going to work on these logs. So I'm using my charcoal pencil, my 6B, to outline the edge of the log where it's going to be, and then I'm going to draw in some of the cracks and rings that are in the wood. I'm just kind of loosely sketching in where the rings might be. Remember, when we drew in our spots with our charcoal pencil, it showed through with other layers of pastel. And that's what's going to happen with these logs. We're going to put in the wood grain, and it's going to show through the other colors that we're going to add later. Now moving on to the second log and doing the same thing. Now using my white charcoal pencil, I can add some white lines to help define the rings on the logs as well. And these will also show through after we add other layers. I'm adding a little black New Pastel to shadow the side of the log. Now on the main log, I've decided to use my 409.3 to add some base color in. And you can see that all the lines show right through. So I'm just going to add that burnt umber to all my logs. Now I'm using the 229 black to color in the shadow side of the log and give it some separation and dimension. I'm using the black to also add a little shadow to the log. The black kind of tones down the brown and gives a variegated color there. You see I'm not applying it solid, just kind of a little bit here and there over my log. And I'm doing the same thing to the other two logs in my painting. I'm using my Rembrandt 700.5 black to make it a little darker, going over all of it with really a very light layer of black. I don't want these logs to be front and foremost in the picture. They are just part of the picture. The cat's the main part of our picture. Now I'm using my gray 704.7 light gray on its end to add some light value to the log. Here I'm going over it again with the 700.5 black. Just kind of, the gray was a little much, so I'm going to put some black over it. Just going back and forth to see what works best to give me the effect of logs in my painting. And now I'm going to add some more gray to the logs. This time I'm adding less gray. And I'm putting it on in the direction that the wood grain is, which is circular. Here I'm using my charcoal pencil to kind of enhance the wood grain. And put the lines in a little stronger. So that I can get the look I'm going for. Here I've switched to the new pastel to make it a little bit darker. And I'm going ahead and adding gray to that second log. I'm using my new pastel black to increase the shadows and contrast in the logs. Now I'm getting the side of that log in. Here I'm using my 700.5 black Rembrandt to add a little color over the back side of the Jaguar to push it back into the picture plane. And now I'm using my 299 New Pastel to add the rings to the logs, define those a little further. I've got my gloves back on and I'm going to add green all along the bottom of my painting. We're going to finish it up. So I'm using those same unison greens that we've used all along to add color. And this is the green 14, so it's a lighter color green. And then I put some of the darker green on top of that. I'm adding more green. This, I believe, is the green 14. It's a yellow-green color. Getting a nice, smooth background area. I'm adding a little brown down into the bottom, which would be the burnt umber 4093, to add some brown tones to that area, kind of break up all that green. Now I'm using my 633.5 Rembrandt permanent yellow green up on its end, and I'm kind of making light circles that kind of give that out of focus background look. We can also use that 633.5 permanent light green on its edge to kind of make leaf shapes, which is what I'm going to do on the left side of the painting. It kind of gives the effect of greenery being down there, but it's out of focus, so it's not, its presence is not overwhelming. If you get too much light in there, you can go back with your dark green and tone it down. It's supposed to have a very abstract and loose feeling to it. Not too much detail, but enough to give your viewer a sense of it being perhaps ivy or tree limbs or something like that. I'm adding some more dark shadows with my 229 black new pastel to the back part of our leopard, just putting in some dark shapes, which helps define it, but not too much. I'm also using my black 229 new pastel to add some more darks to the logs, and the 299 to add more lights. This is a time when you're just looking around your painting, seeing what you want to change or what you want to improve. Now I'm getting that leaf look to that green area by using the 633.5 Rembrandt, but by leaning on one edge so that it makes a sharp edge. And I've kind of shaped it to look like leaves. So rather than using it flat, I'm putting more pressure on the outside edge to draw the shape of a leaf. If that's hard for you, you can also use one of your other green colors, like your 348 Endive or your 308 Palm Green New Pastels, to draw leaf shapes in. You can make it as detailed as you want to. I'm using my black new pastel to add some shadows between the shapes and define them further, and check other things in my painting. I pretty much think this is finished. So we bring this wonderful video workshop of the Jaguar to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you again next time.